the last couple days just a little bit about RFPs and contracts. I think I mentioned that the National Alliance is working on a PBM RFP. I know through, and we'll hear hit today, Health Rosetta through Nautilus is working on RFP, but it's all about the RFPs and the contracts. And again, if you don't get that right from the beginning, you're kind of putting yourself in a bad spot. So I was connected to Steve. Again, I've been connected to so many people in putting this together. I don't know who connected us, Steve, but I'm glad we're connected. And I was connected to Jeff through Greg Baker, CEO of Affirmed RX, and I've known Chris Deacon for a number of years through the National Alliance. We're going to see a prompt up here, and we'll let her in when she arrives. Again, her flight got delayed out of Heathrow yesterday, and she really tried, and but this is the best we can do. So until she gets here, it's the Jeff and Steve show. So you all can start, and we'll Zoom Chris in as soon as we can get that prompt. So go ahead, folks.
All right. Well, as soon as you said it was the Jeff and Steve show, my heart went up to about 120 beats a second.
A little bit.
So for all the rest of you, you're probably not heart at a high rate, but you're probably thinking about all those emails that you missed yesterday and all the work that's going to be waiting for you when you get back. So we're going to do what my wife always tells me: take a deep breath. Put your feet in front of you, find a nice solid spot, lean back, breathe through your nose, exhale. I feel better already.
Woosah.
I guess so. Whew. So Chris Deacon, and thank you for the introduction. You said this is the thing that you have to think about. When people ask me what contracts, what they should think about, I always say it's kind of like a parachute. It's pretty darn boring while you're packing it, but if you don't, it gets exciting very quickly, right, when you need it. And so that's a little bit of our perspective. As Chris said, I'm representing Nautilus today. Nautilus is the not-for-profit arm, newly formed, of Health Rosetta. And if you're familiar with Health Rosetta and what we're doing is we're really on a mission to try and help employers transform healthcare. And my personal perspective is that a lot of what ails healthcare is a result of poor compliance, and that's led to poor procurement. And so this focus on contracts is really how can you create a fiduciary-aligned contract with a PBM that generates better benefits, which is what we're all here for, at a lower cost, and ultimately creates happier, healthier employees. And that is possible. And that's no other place, I think, in health benefits is it as possible as it is in the PBM. And there were a couple of different people who said that yesterday, who said this is the place to start, right? If you're looking to save money, if you're looking to improve your benefits, if you're looking to have a more partnerial relationship, PBM is the place to start. And part of the reason we say that is on the medical benefits side, particularly if you're not just a single location employer, the whole network piece is really hard, and getting all that contracted and everything is really hard. But for the most part, PBMs can serve you everywhere you need to be. They all have pharmacy networks or can access them, and there's always mail order as an option. And so you can get, and here's the key thing, the right drug to the right participant at the right price. And that's ultimately what our contracting is all about. So to introduce our folks, and let me know if Chris sneaks up on us at some point. But Chris Deacon is extremely well known, and one of, if not the leading attorneys in the space. You probably read that she was behind the big win just last week around Horizon, and you heard yesterday that it really turned on a single term that she made sure was in an RFP and a contract. And specifically it was, you are not going to bill us any more than you pay the pharmacy. Really simple, one sentence, $150 million difference to the state of New Jersey. So she'll talk to us about that. We've got here today Jeff Hauser from Affirm. And beyond Affirm, Jeff has been an underwriter in the PBM space for a really long time. And what that means is he knows every loophole, every nook and cranny that a traditional PBM uses to extract money from you and your participants. And so what he has to say today should be highly interesting to you, and without trying to be a threatening guy, is the kind of thing that no other traditional PBM wants to hear spoken in public. Yep. And so we're hoping to share a little bit of that with you today. So the challenge that Chris gave us in putting this together was real simple. Let's tell them what not to put in a contract. Let's tell them what to put in a contract. And then let's tell them when they go back to the office on Friday or Monday, what's the first thing that they ought to do to begin this transformational journey. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So Chris was going to take this first one, but I'll jump in a little bit. And maybe this is a little bit of a joke, but it's based in reality. Is what's the one thing you don't want to put in a contract? It's anything the PBM has written. It's true, right? And someone said yesterday that they were talking about pricing, but it applies to pricing and the spreadsheet and the RFP and in particular the contract is you want to hold the pen. You want to make. We're going to admit here. Yay!
All right.
I know, right?
So, Chris, you've already missed the introduction. We gave you a glowing one. You'd still be blushing right now, but I did want to share with the whole audience that I'm very dubious about this idea that your plane didn't fly out of Heathrow. I think personally, you looked at the weather report, saw that it was cold and rainy in Houston, and said, "I get plenty of that in London. I don't need to get on a plane for it."
It's here too, so I avoided it.
Yep.
Or I didn't avoid it, I guess you could say.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks for joining us. And I just shared with the audience, and you came in right on your point where we're going to talk about what are the things that are first off, what shouldn't go in a contract. Secondly, what should go in a contract. And then thirdly, what's the first thing they should do when they get back to the office. And so we were just starting to tee up what is it that should not go into a contract. And so, you are the queen of, legal language, sitting in a contract that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the most, to start, one of the most important things to remember is that almost every contract that you've signed as an employer, whether it be a PBM contract or an ASA or ASO agreement, they're all going to have a provision that says that the vendor is going to administer the plan in accordance with plan documents. That's usually a glossed over provision because, of course, they're going to administer the plan in accordance with the plan documents. But what that is your tool to make sure that, everything that you want to do is in your plan documents in some way. And so whether that's beefing up fiduciary obligation language or including prepayment or payment integrity services or solutions or certain PBM and drug spend provisions that are more employer friendly than you would usually get in the contract, that provision incorporates your plan documents by reference, right? So now that plan document is part of your contract. And it's just sort of top of mind for me because I have been speaking with a lot of employers who didn't recognize that this is such a tool. And it's usually a provision that you don't get pushback on from the vendor that's sitting on the other side of the table. So I just wanted to sort of lead with that. I guarantee you, if you go back to your offices and, you know, Control F the language that I just said, some iteration of it will be in your contract. So make sure that you take advantage of your ability to, you know, artfully craft and, you know, fully craft your plan documents so that you can incorporate those terms by reference into your agreements. Now, did you have a question?
Well, maybe just a quick follow-up, if you can hear us okay, is would you recommend then including a copy of your plan documents with a contract up front to not only do we have the language, but here's the document and it's fully laid out in front of you of what we require of you in order to be a bidder?
Yes, absolutely. Your plan document, because they're incorporated by reference, they usually, you know, they should be attached if they're not. And if they're not, that really shows the lack of, you know, probably more on the vendor's part, but the lack of appreciation about what you specifically, like what your plan, you know, what terms your plans should be administered by, right? So yeah, I would say definitely make sure it's included. And this is another really, really important reason to not necessarily like delegate the drafting of that document to anybody that doesn't have sort of your fiduciary interests in mind, right? Like perhaps it's a tedious process to draft this, you know, plan documents and keep them updated. And so maybe you want to say, sure, we'll start on somebody else's paper or we'll use your form and just tweak it a little bit. This is a golden opportunity to make sure that you have the terms, like how you want your plan administered in that document so that again, when, you know, for example, I'll just give you an example of how this came up recently. An employer wanted to continue to have payment integrity services conducted on their plan. And I counseled them, like, if you have sort of that payment integrity program sort of fully disclosed and the terms of it and how it works in your plan documents, you're putting your vendor on notice that that is your intent. And that is, again, going to be incorporated by reference. And you can point to it when you say, actually, it's in our contract that you've agreed to administer the plan in accordance with these documents. And they clearly set forth that this is how our plan, you know, how we want it to be administered. So yes, definitely include it.
Yep, that sounds great. So the one comment I think you missed right before you came in was our firmly held belief that you should control the PIN, right? Not the PBM. You write your contract or with help of an expert like yourself to write the contract, but we'll add to that the plan document as well, right? Sounds critically important. So Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got Jeff here who's representing the evil empire of all the tips and tricks he's seen of how PBMs try and get around what you just said. What do you think?
Yeah, you know, and we're going to get there in a minute, right, about the things that truly transparent PBMs are willing to put in contracts that you typically fight with, the more traditional ones. And it's very well aligned to what Chris is talking about here. The language that ties the control back to how you want your design and your benefit to run. We're talking about definitions, you know, that first 6 pages of the contract that are clean and clear and precise, and most importantly, I think to me, affirmative definitions, right? You don't want vague definitions that leave this, you know, this questionability to them, right? You know, a good example that I can think of is one of the most basic ones, and that is how is a PBM defining brand and generic drugs, right? So I'll give 2 definitions, and I'm going to reference Medi-Span and a few different codes. And if we don't necessarily have the full understanding of exactly what those are, that's okay. But, you know, first definition, right? A generic drug equals a drug that is tagged as Medi-Span code Y, okay? It's a generally industry accepted way to define a generic drug. you can change that just slightly, and it sounds very similar. Generic drug is defined as such by Medi-Span, right? But what that didn't do is tell you exactly what is a generic, that why drug, because there's a bunch of other codes that, depending on who you are, you can make an argument and say, I don't want to call this a brand drug. And the question of why is, well, because as soon as I call it a generic, I don't have to pay a rebate on it. So let's find creative ways to use this definition that has a loophole opened and say, now I don't have to pay a rebate on a drug that I actually got a rebate on because I want to call it a generic today. So, you know, again, on these definitions, we can probably, between Chris and I, tear apart just about every definition out there. But they need to be affirmative, right? They need to spell out exactly what something means. And it's okay if they're not consistent across every PBM, as long as they are clear, right? If someone wants to define it slightly different, we can deal with that. But you have to know what it means.
Perfect. So Chris, you missed also in the intro, and I'm telling you it was comprehensive and glowing, but we talked just a little bit about your big win this past week, and how yesterday there were a couple of different speakers that talked about that it really turned on just a couple of words, maybe in a short sentence that you had in both the RFP and in the contract about you will not bill the plan sponsor more than you paid the pharmacy. And that's a really impactful thing to have in a contract. Any other thoughts on that and other things that you would recommend that they should absolutely have in their contract?
Yeah, so this was, it was for the medical spend, but, certainly not a reason that you couldn't put it in on a PBM contract as well. I think that, first, just for everybody's knowledge, the settlement was based upon that lesser of language, which I'll cover, but the underlying whistleblower complaint that has not yet been unsealed, I would say, is sort of the other 60 to 75% of sort of issues that were brought forth in the complaint. They just weren't necessarily pursued by the state AG's office that resulted in the settlement. So stay tuned, more to come on that. You're going to want to read that document when it becomes unsealed, because it really will be a roadmap for you to follow some of these issues and uncover them in your own plan. Number one. Number two, the language that we put in to the contract, first from a procedural perspective, the bidders came to that language and they didn't get to say no, right? So these are the terms of the agreement. If you can't abide by these terms, then you can't bid, right? Like, you're not eligible for our business. So first, we sort of put that up front, and then it was agreed to, obviously. And I think for a lot of employers, they assume that they are never going to pay higher than sticker price, right? We're often told, yeah, that's just the charge, or yes, that's just the bill. Don't pay attention to that. Nobody pays the full amount, right? What we don't assume is that we pay more than that sticker price and more than that bill. But that's exactly what was happening. And knowing that that had taken place in the prior contract and seen an opportunity, we said, negotiated rate or billed amount. Basically, I'll pay the sticker price or less than the sticker price. And on, 50 claims alone, for blue card claims, on 50 claims alone, we overpaid by $12 million. So this is not a rare occurrence. This isn't sort of a one-off. This isn't something that comes out as a wash, which, you will be told by your TPA or carrier if you challenge this. But you get a big discount too. So in the end, we think you come out ahead. That's not how this works. I need to come out ahead on every transaction. So I think that this type of language is key. First, understanding that this is an issue, this language is key. And then finally, trust but verify. They agreed to this language. They agreed that they could do it. They agreed that they would implement it. And turns out they did so, at least according to the Attorney General, with the understanding all along that they couldn't do it and they wouldn't do it. And so that's sort of where the False Claims Act piece of it comes into it. But it was a great recovery, and I think the most important part of that case is that it brought to light some behaviors that I think the industry employers will benefit from having more knowledge of.
Can I comment on that just briefly? Chris did a webinar for our legislative advocacy organization, Texas Employers for Affordable Healthcare, a few weeks ago. That's recorded and can be seen on our website. She spoke of her book, The Great American Healthcare Heist. Highly recommend it. As I have done that a few times in the last day and a half. But following up on that webinar, Chris provided a really nice document to support employers who want to utilize that lesser of logic. So we have that as a resource through our organization as well.
Yeah, just one point on lesser of. I've also been touting that in the pharmacy space, and it's a little difficult conceptually sometimes, because the question is what's lesser than, and we've got the actual price that you pay a pharmacy. We have NADAC, which covers most generic drugs, not all. We've got some percentage off of WAC or AWP or other kinds of sometimes fictitious benchmarks. And the piece that I've heard recently, and Chris, you just touched on it, that there's some PBMs that have difficulty building in all of that logic into their adjudication. And so the kind of the issue of yes, they agree to it, but no, they can't, no, they won't, exists on the PBM side as well as on the medical side. So just again, I think some tough questions to ask, and it does get back to verify. And part of what I would recommend to everybody is ask the tough questions, right? Like, okay, you've agreed to this. Can you actually execute it? Can you give me an example of how you would do this? And also, what's the implication if you don't? And so maybe there's a performance guarantee behind that, or there's a reconciliation behind that, and hopefully it's short of having to take them to court. But that's I guess the final piece here.
Yeah.
Jeff, any other thoughts?
Look, I mean, court, right, is a last resort. Obviously, you want to make sure you're protected if you have to come to that point. But you brought up a very good point in the supposed difficulty of implementing some of these things. And I think the real tough question you have to ask the prospective PBM is it because you truly can't, or is it because you want a reason not to, right? The traditional landscape of lesser of logic, because it sounds great when you read it, right? We've got three different options of pricing. You've got the discount, the MAC price, or the UNC price. It sounds great. We're going to give you the lower of those. But here's the thing. The PBM controls and contracts what that discount percentage is. The PBM controls their MAC list, so they're deciding what that is. UNC price, although, and for those unaware, it stands for usual and customary. That's kind of the cash price that a customer would walk into and pay the pharmacy if they didn't have coverage. On a handful of drugs, it's a decent price, but more often than not, it's not the lower of. So, just simply saying lower of leaves a lot of things open to manipulation to make that favorable for the PBM. So that's why it's important to work in conversations, things with NADAC, with an acquisition cost model. Because lower of three options, more often than not, does not mean the lowest price possible.
Yep. So just one other point here. Sorry, Chris. Hopefully you'll agree with this, but a lot of what we're talking about is if you're dealing with a traditional PBM that implements and uses spread pricing to make money, and we talked about spread pricing yesterday, right, where you pay the pharmacy one thing and you bill the plan sponsor something higher. If what you say is, I want to work with a truly transparent, pass-through, fiduciary aligned, and there's all sorts of adjectives to it, but the bottom line is they don't make money on the drug. They make money on administering your benefit and being aligned with you to try and reduce costs. Then you get a whole lot of better answers, right? And someone said to me the other day, it's like a fishing analogy. If you fish in the right hole, it's a whole lot easier to fish, and you don't need to worry about, all these other things, right? You ask them a straightforward question, and you get a straightforward answer because their interests and their incentives are aligned with yours.
Yeah.
Chris, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that, one of the biggest hurdles in actually executing on the strategy that you just described is our current RFP processes and the current, so the most common RFP processes would not necessarily surface, right, that lowest overall cost. And sometimes it makes those truly transparent, I'm not making on the drug, I'm only making money on the administrative side, right? So obviously if I'm not making a ton of money on the drug, my administrative costs are going to look higher. But if the PBM is able to manipulate the RFP process to make it look like both the guaranteed discounts are going to look better and maybe all the other revenue streams, they don't need to make as much of that on the admin side, and they're going to, maybe they're going to say they look better. And some consultants, because they're also getting a cut of it, are going to, sort of perpetuate that model. So I think it's really important to get that RFP process right so that you are, inviting and evaluating all of the right vendors in that fishing pond. Yep. To continue your analogy.
So you are the perfect tee-up person, for the next piece here, which is, what should you really do on Friday or Monday, when you get back to the office. And what I would recommend you do is exactly what Chris said, and maybe with just a couple of additions. The first off is you need to go to any broker you currently have, any PBM consultant you have, and make sure that you have their compensation disclosed. And it's a legal requirement. It's part of CAA. They should have brought it to you already if you don't have it, and if you don't have it, you need to ask them for it. And if they stutter or are evasive or give you something that's well lawyered and hard to understand, you have your answer. And your answer is you need a different broker or a different advisor or a different consultant, in the process. But that's number one. Number two is exactly, what Chris was just getting to is, so you decide, all right, I've got to figure out what kind of a relationship I have. Take your contract, your existing contract, and look at it and identify those clauses that you think are most likely to cause you the problems that we've talked about. And it's, are you being, how are you handling rebates? Are you passing through all the rebates? Are you characterizing rebates in all the ways that they might be characterized? And it's essentially more what payments you're getting from manufacturers, not just from rebates. Are you doing spread pricing? Are you in any way have a conflict of interest? Say you own a bunch of pharmacies, you're CVS and you send all of this to pharmacies. You have to root out conflicts of interest. So there's probably 10 provisions that you could send, and I'm just limited to 10, that you send to your existing PBM and say, we've got to resolve these. We have to reconcile these. We have to take them out of our contract. And again, I think you're going to see a couple of things. One is it's likely to come back with a whole bunch of red lines all over it, and it's probably going to come back with a bunch of pushback. And you have your answer right there. You are dealing with someone that's not aligned with your fiduciary interests. And so you can either decide to battle them, truly battle them, someone that's supposed to be your partner, you're going to battle them to get that contract right, or you can go and test the market. And what you would want to do is to test the market with those PBMs that you believe are transparent and fiduciary aligned. The reason I say you believe is those are marketing terms. Anybody can put them on their marketing. It can come out of the mouth of any salesperson. But if you put those 10 or so provisions in front of them and say, will you agree to it, what you ought to get back is yes. That should be their answer, yes, to all 10. And what you're doing at that point is you're taking these terms, transparency and all of that, out of marketing and into fiduciary aligned contracting, right? So instead of saying it, they're proving it, and that's number one. And so then the last piece is when you send out your RFP, again, you're not looking at things like AWP minus certain percent or rebates or whatever. You're really just looking at what's your admin fee, and the second piece, and Renzo really touched on this yesterday, is what are the clinical elements that you're going to bring to the table that would allow me to reduce my costs and improve the delivery of care to my members. And the first thing in that is probably control your formulary. Most formularies, your existing formulary, was probably driven for rebates, and instead you want to drive it for lowest net cost and highest efficacy. So again, the drug that performs the best at the lowest cost, and proven through evidence and not proven through just what the pharma company tells you. The next piece that you're probably going to want to do is to make sure you've got your utilization and your prior authorizations in place. And you don't want somebody that's rubber stamping prior authorizations just because it's going to drive higher utilization of higher cost, higher margin drugs. So get that utilization right. And then, probably the last thing that's a part of that that's super important but also doable is a disruption analysis. And you can make a decision of, if they're not on the drug that's in the new formulary, how do I handle that? Do I grandfather it? Do I, work with their physician? Do I work with them? Do I do that in a really appropriate way, not, any rough handling, but get people to the drug that will perform the best at the lowest cost for them? If you do those things, you will likely have a price that's 20 to 30% below what the traditional PBMs would charge you all in. And so the last thing I'm going to say is the way that you get at that is you have the numbers to calculate your current PMPM or PEPY, whatever you want to look at it, and just take those two numbers and then go back to these folks that you sent the RFP to and ask them for what's the PEPM or PEPY that they would guarantee. Not you think it's going to deliver this, but what is it they'll guarantee? And you'll be able to see, pretty easily the waterfall to how you get to that 20, 30, 40%. And you can do that with a transparent. You can't easily do that with someone that's playing whack-a-mole and trying to hide, all their revenue sources from you.
And to add to that, right, I heard you say something that's very important. We're talking about, yes, PBMs can commit to being fiduciarily aligned, mutually aligned incentives to save money. If they're not willing to prove it, you've got an issue, right? And to prove it, you have to have access to your data. Just about every RFP has a question to that. Will you, as the PBM, provide us the data? And every PBM out there says yes. But that's usually where the question ends, right? Yeah, we'll give you data. You might get 5-6 columns. It says Jeff Hauser took 12 scripts this year and paid this much money.
Not the 200 elements.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. At Affirmed, our claims extract daily, I can't remember the exact number. It's 250 or so columns of data for every script. Now, I'm not going to say you actually want all 250 of those elements. You don't want to be watching it. But if you don't have access to it and your contract doesn't require that the PBM make that available to you, you've got issues. As soon as there's one element that's not willing to be shared, something's being hidden.
So what we, first off, if you want a data spec of what those 250 elements should be, we can certainly provide that to you.
Happy to get it to you.
And by the way, I should have said in the beginning, part of what Nautilus is doing as part of a not-for-profit is we're trying to make all of this available at no cost to the industry. And so you can get, all the contract terms I've been talking about, and you can get the list of the data specifications and all the 250 elements and things you ought to ask for. But the simplest thing to ask for is really two files, is give me your entire rebate file down to the NDC level so I know for every drug what the rebate was, and I can understand, not only kind of have an audit trail for that, but I can also understand what the impact is at the individual level of whoever's taking that drug. And then the second file you ought to ask for is essentially their paid file, which gets back to the, what did you pay all these pharmacies for every drug on every day. If you get those two files, you can do any analysis you want. And like you said, you don't need to look at the 250 elements, but there's somebody out there that can help you look at the 250 elements and determine if you're getting the deal that they say they are.
Can I come on in?
Please.
Just with a quick question?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, if I just want to take a step back and make sure that, well, at least I want to communicate that while all of the steps that were just outlined are definitely best in class in terms of getting to where you need to be, I am very sensitive to the fact that not everybody can dump their big box consultant. Not everybody can dump their big 3 PBM. As the state of New Jersey with 800,000 lives, we had a prerequisite that that was required by procurement that the bidders have serviced 100,000 life public sector group. Well, that really limits who can bid on your business. So I don't want anybody to walk away thinking that a precondition to improvement is having to walk away from those two big things. I think that is the direction you should be moving. But there are realities, right, that exist in the world that we need to understand and live with. And so there are incremental improvements that you can make within that construct to move in the right direction, even if not sort of totally, where you might want to end up. I would also say that from a conflicts perspective and compensation disclosure, certainly ask for what you're legally entitled to get, but you can always ask for more. You're the client. Don't forget that. Yes, the CAA might say that you are entitled to X, Y, and Z information on comp, but you can always go further and ask, well, I really want to know what you get, as a result of these 3 other revenue streams. You can always ask for more disclosure. And when you do so, I think it's really important to understand that we can't approach conflicts as one strike and you're out, right? The healthcare system and the vertical integration, the horizontal, all of it has created such a mess of conflicts that they are almost impossible to avoid. The key is to knowing that they exist, knowing where they exist, and knowing how to de-weaponize them with that knowledge, right? So maybe there is a conflict because somebody's getting a revenue stream from something that you would prefer not exist, but, I'm not going to change Aon, Mercer, Willis Towers Watson, insert name here, right? Know the conflict and then, again, de-weaponize it with that knowledge. Perhaps you're going to evaluate things differently with that understanding. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure that, because there are possibly some really big public sector entities with labor unions or, stakeholder groups that would make that transition very, very difficult or at least very prolonged. But that doesn't mean that you can't make incremental steps and improvement in the short term. And I also just wanted to apologize for appearing as like the Wizard of Oz. And why my lighting is so bad. Just throw that in there.
That's funny.
The great and wonderful Chris.
I have that is funny. So obviously, this is really important, and we're kind of at getting close to time here. I have a question, and then let me just say this. 250 columns, Jeff, a lot going on there. Chris, you, because of your data, you were able to be successful with the Horizon settlement. My portal of entry into our organizations is the benefits directors. They're not sitting there looking at 250 columns.
Nor would I recommend trying.
And I know Chris isn't either, and there are these things that can be done, and I know you are a great Affirm, Capital, right up the ones we had out here. They're really good, but it's kind of like, trust me. Would you recommend that most employers have somebody independently looking at the data that you are?
Yep, absolutely.
If I've learned nothing, I've learned the importance of having oversight, an oversight layer in this. So I'd comment on that. And then the other thing I'm going to say is that this is really interesting stuff, at least for kind of data nerds like me. I hope that in 2026, to follow this forum, we will host a workshop on RFPs, contracts, and data. So this is the beginning. It can't be the end.
Perfect.
Yeah, great point. And you're right. That's a ton of data. And again, I don't always enjoy looking at it. It's a conceptual guideline, right? If they're not willing to share all of it, you have to wonder what's being pulled out, right? So no, do you need all of them to audit, to ensure that you're getting the transparency? No, but again, if it's not willing to be shared in the first place, you have to wonder why and what's being hidden.
Would you like to open it up for questions?
Yeah, we've got a little bit of time built in here, just a few minutes, but Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly respond to that. You know, how I actually uncovered what I did that eventually led to this case. I did on my own. I was looking at a file, and I literally just filtered the columns so that I could see plan paid, billed amount, and plan paid amount. And it was as simple as those two columns, right? So yes, can be daunting and you need expertise, but also kind of back to my earlier point, like there are always opportunities. And I am by no means, especially then in my career, like a data expert. But I saw enough to see that something was wrong and lead me to ask for more and more and more. So yeah, we want to get to that future state where we have that expertise, but it's certainly not necessary to start tomorrow.
Okay. Question or two? There's got to be some. Okay. Got to imagine Renzo.
I invoked his name at least 3 times and didn't know he was sitting there.
This is maybe more of a comment than a question, but you talk about not always being able to leave the big 3, even if you want to. There might be constraints. Certainly understand that. One of the things in that scenario that we would recommend, and this is something that we've been doing for years and years, is at least carve out the clinical decision component. Decouple the profiteering motives from the clinical decisions, because otherwise you're going to get a decision based on PBM profit, not based on what's the right choice for the patient and the plan. So if you are in that scenario, just something to consider.
Perfect.
Anybody else?
So, Chris, while we're waiting for anybody else, what's a myth? What's a myth that you would like to bust about contracts and RFPs?
What is a myth? I think that, well, again, going back to size and leverage and what can you accomplish today, I think taking no for an answer on the first, sort of go round. A lot of employers assume because of their size or their lack of leverage that they're not able to push back on certain terms. But I would argue that, perhaps the tools in the toolbox of a 800,000 life group, look very different than the tools in a 70-person or 700-person life group. But that doesn't mean they're without tools. And many of those can be contractual. And I know I'm not really answering your question, but the other thing I would point out is that 90% of your contract and the success of your contract is going to live and die in pages 1 through 6 in your definitions, right? 1 through whatever. A lot of the provisions that you were talking about earlier that were really important included words like rebate and claim and generic. I'd agree to anything if you let me write the definition section, right? Definitions are key. So if you want to spend your red ink very wisely in a contract and you know you only get so much, that's where you need to spend your time and your red ink.
Awesome. So I've got one for you that you can hopefully answer for us. We talked, and you talked appropriately, Chris, about there's some things that maybe only the big guys could do because of certain constraints. But, one that I hear all the time is there's no way these little guys can have a better cost than the big guys because they've got so much more leverage and buying power. How would you react to that?
I'll try to make this quick. I know we're at time, but the truth is out there when you're talking about rebates and pharmacy discounts and things like that, there is not that big of a gap between what CVS and Walgreens and the grocers make available to the big three and what they make available to the small PBMs. Their motivation, they want the claims in-house, and they'll take them from any PBM. So if you see on a proposal a gap of 50% in the pricing between a smaller mid-market PBM and and one of the big three, it probably wasn't evaluated correctly, or they're lying.
And my response, if I was ever asked that question or that position was made to me, would probably pull up ChatGPT and say, how much profit did Optum return to shareholders last year? Right? And point out that size is not always leveraged for the purposes for which we think it is being leveraged, for our benefit.
Okay.
Yep,
We've got 2 questions here, and we really have to finish this up in 3 minutes. So
I'll be brief.
Speed round.
Steve, in the Health Rosetta Nautilus Toolkit,
Yes.
is there a toolkit letter there? And if not, can you provide one?
So there's 2 tools. One is we've got the full list of data specifications out there, so you can just go pull it down and you can have, this is what we expect to see. That's there. The thought is the letter is probably as simple as, here's our data specification, please provide it to us, right? So we can do that. The second piece is that we've got a tool out there that we're calling the configurator. And the configurator can be configured. The part that can be configured is the questions or contract terms that you want to ask them about.
For an RFP.
For an RFI or an RFP. But it could be as simple as, I mentioned earlier, here are the 10 things I want you to agree to. Number 1 or somewhere in there is you'll provide us all the data according to it. And, oh, by the way, here's the list of data that we want. And so those 2 things are there. But I would happily have drafted, sample letters, if you guys think that would be helpful.
Okay, last question, Susan.
I'll try and make it really brief. I have led my RFPs with a contract and no questionnaire for 15 years. The big three never bid.
Yep.
We
Tells you
got
something,
that.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even the mid-tier, there's a lot of red ink. And we've heard why. I mean, rebates are done at an aggregator level. So if you say, like Renzo was saying, carve out the clinical decisions.
Yep.
Okay, but you get no rebates then. So how do you balance your ability to write a contract with the client getting the leverage of these clinical decisions, doing their own prior authorizations, making their own clinical programs, and getting any kind of financial consideration for rebates or with rebate aggregators the way they exist?
Yeah. So this may not be the answer you wanted, but one of the things, and I'll touch on something Jeff said as well, is you have to have a philosophy of what you're trying to enforce or incentivize in your contract, first off. And so, I've been beating up on spread pricing, right? Spread pricing actually exists in almost every transaction out there in the world, right? Where I buy a product for X and I charge you Y, right? It's not evil. But part of what's evil, if you will, about it in a contract is it's typically hidden. You don't know how much you're paying, and it's at a point where it's disadvantaging pharmacies and putting them out of business, and in particular independent pharmacies. And if you value pharmacies and pharmacists and having them be a part of your care continuum, you should not want spread pricing, or you should at least want fair pricing. And the way that I equate it, by the way, is kind of like fair trade coffee. Like, I love Colombian coffee. I like Juan Valdez to be paid a fair price so he could be making coffee forever, right? Even if that means I pay a little more, just, as an example. The same thing I'll say on the rebate side for just a second. We had someone raise their hands yesterday of, do you know where rebates come from? Do you know who pays for rebates?
The employer.
The employer sometimes, but largely the employee.
Well, yeah.
Right? Okay. And so if you're in particularly a high deductible health plan, which many have, and you have $5,000, $6,000 of deductible, your sickest employees are paying for their drugs. And the way that a rebate works, and there was math in the documentary that Renzo and everyone showed the other day, is you want more rebate, you inflate the size of the drug. Exactly. And that means that those sickest employees are paying an inflated price so that you can get a rebate. And then what do you do with that rebate? Sometimes you distribute it back to everybody. Sometimes you pay for some technology. There are even some plans that take it out of the plan assets altogether and put it on their balance sheet. And so what I would say is I believe rebates are evil. I know I've used that term before. Maybe at one point they were good. At this point, you don't want rebates. So now, getting back to your question, is you need to focus on the lowest net cost. And that's what you need to ask. And that's what you need to look for. And when I mention this difference in PMPM or PEPY, is what you're seeing is the differentiation of lowest net cost. And once you do that, rebates are kind of out of the question. By the way, on lowest net cost, you may get some rebates like biosimilars these days, or doing different things, but lowest net cost is ethical, it's legal, and it's going to be your best price.
And that's the health-o-meter that we had, but we've got to end this now.
We're done.
Chris, I'm so glad you were able to make it. It's kind of cool that the Wizard of Oz look there. Really kind of.
You ought to do it.
And you're above, just kind of like in the movie. So it's so again, let's give these folks a hand.
Thank you.